Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video.
Think it'll scare the kids?
The kids? This will give the parents nightmares.
What's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG. So with this video, I'm going to go over Indominus Rex Alpha. I never thought in a million years I would say that on a Magic the Gathering video, but here we are today. But I will say I absolutely loved this movie when it first came out. When I first saw this on opening night, I was just absolutely shocked and amazed with all the stuff that they did, and also for the return of Jurassic Park in the form of Jurassic World. Not gonna lie guys, I saw this about 4 or 5 times in the theater alone, and I have my own personal copy of course, but honestly, this was one of my favorite movies that came out in the past decade. But the story is only as good as its villain. Of course, the Indominus Rex was an absolute powerhouse in that movie, having all sorts of different abilities, which matches the card's personality perfectly. So first of all, let's read the card. Let's see what it does. So for 1 Dimir Hybrid, and also 2 green, we have a legendary creature, Dinosaur Mutant. It enters with a flying counter on it if a card discarded this way has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Haste, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So if that wasn't enough, it also does have another enter the battlefield trigger with draw a card for each counter on it. So looking at my overall opinion about this card, it's very neat and very Indominus-like because it takes the best genes of different dinosaurs like the T-Rex, the Velociraptor, and many other things that you may be discarding so that you could have those abilities stapled onto Indominus Rex. Plus, not to mention that you'll draw cards equal to the counters on it, so there's many ways we could do that with 1/1 counter synergies. Also with all those counters that it does enter the battlefield depending on what kind of creatures you discarded. So I'll tell you what, after researching and coming up with some ideas, I feel like Indominus Rex can be abused pretty well, especially with clones and also with a little bit of a reanimator package. But first of all, we do want to draw as much cards as we can with Indominus Rex. We want a lot of different keywords on our creatures, but we also want to make sure they're viable. We don't want to just chuck a bunch of creatures in our deck that are basically having all these keywords, but they aren't really that great. So with more of my strategy, I wanted to focus on having good creatures that have great abilities, but that will also be great in the deck and not have to worry about just putting janky creatures in the deck just for the sake of it. So with that said, let's go over some creatures that have wonderful abilities that we could abuse with Indominus Rex. So of course, these creatures do have great keywords, but they're also very useful outside of that. Say for example, Toski, Bearer of Secrets. This spell can't be countered and it does have Indestructible. Our Indominus Rex will get an Indestructible counter if we do discard it, but if we do want to play, it'll enter the battlefield, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So that's the versatility I am talking about in this deck, where we want to have a focus on keywords, but they also do have great abilities like Toski to draw some cards. Another card draw option and a great versatile option overall is Elder Gargaroth. So for 3 and 2 green, it has Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. And again, if we do discard it with Indominus Rex will have all those abilities. But most importantly, this also does have a great attack and block trigger. You could either create a 3/3 beast creature token, you could gain 3 life, or most importantly, you could draw a card, which personally I would take that every single time. Aside from that, I feel like another great card in the deck that's pretty aggressive is N-Ray's Forerunners. So for 5 and triple green, it has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. And when it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. So if we do discard this with Indominus Rex, we could draw 3 cards and give Indominus Rex Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. But if we want to put on the battlefield in the later game and possibly close out, that's a great option as well. But of course, the big elephant in the room that a lot of people have been talking about is Scavenge Brawler, mainly because it has 4 different abilities of Flying, Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink for 6 mana. So yeah, you could discard this with Indominus Rex's ability and draw 4 cards. Then later on, you could exile this by paying 5 mana. You choose target creature, put 4 1/1 counters, a flying counter, a vigilance counter, a trample counter, and a lifelink counter on that creature, activate only as a sorcery. So even when you do put it in the graveyard, it's going to get that effect where you could exile it later for extra value on another creature you do control. One last card I'd like to bring your attention to in this section is Kefnet the Mindful. So for 2 and a blue, we have a legendary creature god, and it does have flying and indestructible. It can't attack or block unless you have 7 or more cards in hand, and it does have a pay 3 and and a blue, draw a card, then you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. So the main reason why I do like this is the fact that it'll give Indominus Rex indestructible. Like Toski, I want a lot of different ways where I could protect my commander, whether giving it hexproof or also giving it indestructible. Plus, if we do have a lot of mana lying around and we need some card advantage, that last ability, even though it's expensive for 3 and a blue by drawing a card, it can be useful. So after talking about some creatures we could dump into the graveyard so that we could draw some more cards with Indominus Rex, I do want to talk about 1/1 counter synergies, because when Indominus Rex enters the battlefield, we will draw cards equal to the amount of counters on it, whether they're hexproof counters, whether they're trample counters, whether even 1/1 counters, you name it. So any type of counter will trigger Indominus Rex to draw some more cards. So the way we can take advantage of that is by using cards like Winding Constrictor. So I will say this is probably one of the best cards you could pair with the Indominus Rex, because if one or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature you control, that many counters plus 1 are placed on that permanent instead. Plus, it also does read, if you would get 1 or more counters, you get that many of those counters plus 1 instead. So I had to make sure I read the ruling on this, because obviously it's very tricky wording with Indominus Rex entering the battlefield with all sorts of different counters. So let's just say, for example, Indominus Rex enters the battlefield with a Vigilance, Trample, and Haste counter on it. Because of Winding Constrictor, you'll get double Trample, double Vigilance, and double Haste. I know that kind of sounds repetitive, but you will have 6 individual counters on Indominus Rex, where you could potentially draw 6 cards based off of that scenario. So this was a cool synergy that I found with a commander with Winding Constrictor. Another example that I do want to touch on is the Great Henge. So this is a pretty popular staple in big creature decks, but this is very useful in this deck. For 7 and 2 green, the spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest in power among creatures you do control. You could also tap it to add 2 green mana and you gain 2 life. So that could have just stopped right there and it would be pretty powerful, because it's going to be reduced and on top of that add 2 green mana. But there's also another ability. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. So if you tap this to pay for the Indominus Rex, you can have it enter the battlefield. We'll draw a card off the Great Henge, and on top of that, we'll put a 1/1 counter on the Indominus Rex so that we could draw an additional card. So I do feel like this is going to be a great all-star in the deck, no question about it. Similar to the Great Henge in the way of getting 1/1 counters on an Indominus Rex is Arwen, Weaver of Hope. For 1 and 2 green, each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of additional 1/1 counters on it equal to Arwen, Weaver of Hope's toughness. So at its base, if Indominus Rex enters the battlefield with Arwen on the battlefield as well, we will get a 1/1 counter on the Indominus Rex to draw a card. But if Arwen, Weaver of Hope was, say for example, a 5/4, then Indominus Rex will enter the battlefield with 4 1/1 counters on it. So yeah, this is going to draw us a lot of cards with Indominus Rex entering the battlefield, or it's just going to buff up all our creatures that we do have. The last card I do want to talk about that synergizes with the Indominus Rex is Archfiend of Ifnir. So the main reason why I like this is the fact that whenever you cycle or discard another card, you put a 1/1 counter on each creature your opponents control. So I'm cooking up a scenario, say for example Archfiend of Ifnir is on the battlefield, then we cast Indominus Rex and we discard about like 4 cards for example. With Archfiend of Ifnir, we'll put 4 -1/-1 counters on each creature our opponents control, essentially board wiping them. Or say for example it's a big creature, it's just going to be like a 2/2 for example. Plus I will say this also does have flying, so if we do want to discard it with the Indominus Rex, if it is in our hand, we don't have to worry, we could just discard it and then we'll put a flying counter on Indominus Rex. That's what's very versatile about these cards and a lot of cards like Archfiend of Ifnir, is they have multiple uses outside of just having keywords. So I do want to move on to the next part of this video, and that's talking about abusing our commander's ability so that we could draw a bunch of cards, putting cards into our graveyard. One way we could do that is simply by cloning our commander. So Jurassic Park is all about clones, so this is very flavorful in the fact that we're cloning the Indominus Rex left and right so that we can make the perfect apex predator. So for example, the best card in my opinion for this is Spark Double. So the main reason why I do like this is the fact that it'll enter the battlefield as a copy of our commander, for example, except it enters with an additional 1/1 counter on it, so we'll be able to draw just off of that alone. Plus this does bypass the legendary rule so that we could have 2 Indominus Rexes on the battlefield. Hopefully one doesn't eat the other though. Either way, this is a pretty scary option for your opponents. Another similar card to Spark Double is Moray of the Frost. So for 2 green and 2 blue, it is a shapeshifter and is a changeling. You can enter the battlefield as a copy of a permanent you control, except it's legendary and a snow in addition to its other types. And if it's a creature, it enters the battlefield with an additional 2 1/1 counters on it. So the big difference between this and Spark Double is the fact that the legendary rule can't be cheated in, and so you'll have to sacrifice one of these creatures. I would actually sacrifice your commander so that you could recast it for later for better value. Plus with Moray, it will enter the battlefield with 2 1/1 counters on it, so at the base you'll draw 2 cards, and whatever you do discard, you'll draw more cards on top of that. So I do feel like this will be a great include. Other great includes are like Sakashima of the Thousand Faces or Sakashima Imposter, mainly because it'll enter the battlefield as a copy without forcing the legendary rule to apply, so you can't sacrifice them, but you'll have those in additional copies, so that's a great value engine by itself so that you can have more Indominus Rex triggers. But the last clone spell I do want to talk about is Helm of the Host. This is quite insane in the deck. So for 4 mana, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if equipped creature is legendary, and that token gains haste. So yeah, as you can see, the longer this sticks on the battlefield, the more we're going to draw cards by having more Indominus Rex on the battlefield so that we can take advantage of it. Plus, if anything else, they're going to have great stats depending on what cards you do pick to throw away into the graveyard. But that does lead me to my last topic, and that's Reanimation. Of course, I'm a big sucker for Reanimation, and this is no exception because we are dumping a lot of cards into the graveyard. We could take advantage of that with Reanimation spells. So we have a lot of classic spells like Reanimate. Of course, you put a target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to the converted mana cost, only for 1 black mana. That is an excellent rate. There's many other options like Animate Dead. There's also Dance of the Dead. Those low CMC reanimation spells will get the job done for you, putting a lot of big creatures on the battlefield that you just discarded with Indominus Rex. Plus, what kind of big creatures do you want in the graveyard? So for me personally, I'm a big Razaketh fan. Plus, it does have Flying and Trample, so you will draw 2 cards off of Indominus Rex if you do discard it. And then when you do reanimate onto the battlefield, we could just have a free tutor as long as we have more and more creatures on the battlefield, which is pretty easy. Another reanimation target I'd like to bring your attention to is Villas Broker of Blood, mainly because it has a great draw ability. Whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards. Say for example, you use Reanimate on it, you'll draw 8 cards just off of Villas reanimating onto the battlefield. There are also a lot of great reanimation targets. If you do want to go check out the list down below so that you can see the full deck list, some of the cards that I talked about, and also some other cards that I didn't talk about, mainly because of time reasons. I don't want to make this video too long for you guys. If I talked about every single individual card, this would be an hour-long video, and I don't want to do that to you guys. I know you guys have more important things to do. So with this video and many of my other videos, I usually talk about synergies with the commander, what kind of goals you should be going for, and that actually is the main purpose of my videos and my deck lists, is to serve as inspiration for you all so that you could brew the Indominus Rex or other commanders the best way you can. With that little spiel out of the way, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on the Indominus Rex Alpha. I can't tell you how excited I am for this, mainly because I love Jurassic Park and I do love Jurassic World, so seeing this come to Magic the Gathering is very exciting for me. Also, let me know down below in the comments, how would you build around the Indominus Rex? Would you go more of the Reanimator spells way, or would you go more of the clones way? Again, let me know down below in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.